Batman is easily the most widely known and popular superhero in the world. He's right up there with Superman. This may be partially due to him defining certain attributes of the costume crime fighter, but the nature of his enduring popularity is something we shall be exploring here. I will be looking at this based upon a historical context of the work, literary themes and tropes of the character that I've noticed, and the cultural debate around the ethical motivations of this hero. I'll also be giving you guys my personal feelings on the work, just to share my individual feelings, as they can't be fully separated from it. Now, feel free to add your own thoughts and experiences in the comments. I'll try to be thorough, but I don't pretend to have read or watched every Batman-related media, or have studied every journalistic piece on him, though I've seen and read quite a bit. So please, I welcome the discussion. Perhaps new information will bring future videos with new perspectives. Well, with that said, let's move forward. Batman first appeared in Detective Comics 27 in 1939, so quite a while ago. He was created by the artist Bob Kane and the writer Bill Finger, though Finger would only be given full credit fairly recently. You may have heard him also called the Dark Knight, the Caped Crusader, or the World's Greatest Detective, which I think is actually my favorite, but I don't hear it as much. Kane and Finger were heavily influenced by 1930s pop culture for inspiration. Some of these inspirations for his character were Zorro, a wealthy man with a secret identity who used his resources to help the downtrodden. Other influences included The Shadow, Dick Tracy, and Sherlock Holmes, drawing from popular pulp vigilantes and detectives of the time. Finger and Kane both collaborated on Batman's ultimate look. Early stories featured Batman killing criminals, showing little remorse. However, after the first few years, this was quickly phased out. In addition to his utility belt, batarangs, and Batmobile, the character's origin was established. This was in regard to the death of his parents at a young age. They were murdered in front of him by a mugger, and his vow to fight crime because of this. In 1940, major foes would be introduced, such as Joker and Catwoman, as well as the sidekick Robin, who was introduced to be a counterpart to Batman, give him somebody to play off of. It also increased sales. As the 1940s progressed, Batman's stories became less dark, gritty social commentaries and were molded more into just fantasy adventures. Throughout the 1950s, the public became less interested in superheroes, which is kind of hard to believe as popular as they are these days. But Batman's books were one of the few to have consistent sales. Unfortunately, this was when the first real controversy over the character arose. After the publication of The Seduction of the Innocent in 1954, comic books, and Batman in particular, came under scrutiny for being a corruptive influence on youth. The work suggested that children who read these stories were likely to commit crimes. It also proposed that Batman and Robin were in a homosexual relationship, something very taboo at the time, and something which, though mostly unsubstantiated in the comics, has never really left the cultural consciousness since. Response to these allegations led to the creation of the Comics Code Authority, which allowed publishers to police themselves to censor potentially suggestive content. After this, Batman stories became lighter in tone and tended to be more sci-fi stories. Sales continued to fall, though, but the success of Adam West's campier version of the character brought new life to the brand and helped make him popular again. By 1970, the team of Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams, they wrote some really great stories, sought to take Batman to his darker roots again, removing Robin from the majority of the stories. Though their stories would have acclaim, the sales would continue to drop until the 1980s. Now, it's around 1986 that things take a really significant turn for Batman. It's at this point that Frank Miller gets his hands on the character and releases The Dark Knight Returns, one of my favorites, an alternate version of the character with Batman at his grittiest, setting the standard for a darker, more modern portrayal of Batman that many viewers are probably more familiar with these days. Miller's Year One storyline also added to the darker tone of Batman's origin, with stories like The Killing Joke and Death in the Family, upping the emotional stakes and intense personal conflict between Batman and the Joker. The 90s and beyond would continue to explore darker storylines within the main DC canon of the comics and in various other stories. Much like many classic superheroes, the secret identity concept is an essential part of the character, though with Batman it's a bit of a reversal, especially when explored by more modern writers. Very notable in the Burton live-action films and the Bruce Timm animated series, it's often been stated by the character that upon his parents' death, Bruce Wayne metaphorically died. He sacrificed any attempt at a truly normal life to begin using his resources to take on a new identity. Batman is one of the few heroes where many have demonstrated that the costume vigilante is the true identity. and Bruce Wayne is a farce to keep up appearances and maintain a certain usefulness. Now, this isn't always true, but it does seem to be a common idea that many writers like to really embrace. Like most other superhero characters in comics, elements of personality do vary from time to time, but some core elements generally remain consistent to keep the character unique. The primary motivation for Bruce Wayne to continue his quest is obviously his parents' murder and being haunted by that trauma. Becoming Batman is very much a way of coping with the tragedy to exert control, which is common for many heroes with similar tragic origins. Perhaps more than any other comic book figure, Batman's choice to be a vigilante and how far he will go is a common discussion both in stories and among fans. Batman technically breaks the law in an attempt to prevent evil from creating such tragedy again. This drive has been one of the main constants that really defines the character through all interpretations. His origin had a profound effect on the character and is his primary motivation for his whole way of life. More modern versions have played with balance of the strong moral code against killing, which often leads to villains committing more terrible acts. Batman harnessed his own childhood fear of bats and turned it into a symbol of power, striking fear into criminals. Most versions of the character dabble in using torture, being generally dark and brooding and alienating himself from others. This lack of personal connection and difficulty with other people in his life is most likely the result of both his childhood tragedy and pure commitment and even obsession with his cause. There have been some versions that have toned this down a bit, though. I think my first memory of Batman was from the 1989 film. I remember that movie in the background when I was a kid. I believe the babysitter put it on or something. I also remember seeing Adam West Batman on television when I was in a hotel and on the road. I think I was visiting my dad. My earliest memory of Kevin Conroy's version was actually the first episode, when he fights Man-Bat. I thought it was pretty scary at the time. That was around the time I would say, probably like age 5 or 6, when I had a clear idea in my mind of who Batman really was, what drove him, motivated him, and why so many people like myself were so intrigued by the character. It was something that I would slowly discover over time. This was originally by myself as a young viewer, then later through various conversations with fellow fans, and now through a combination of willful academic-style study and online requests, which all culminated in this video being made. How about that? I think Batman certainly has a special place in my life, and his stories have a unique meaning to me. I also think that one of the elements that makes Batman such a popular character is what we can all see in him. Every superhero provides a form of escapism. Having the power to do something truly great, knowing for sure what your calling is and what your purpose is, and shaping your own destiny. These are all things which really intrigue us about superhero stories. While modern storylines, especially in Marvel, have been really blurring the line between the superhero and real life, DC heroes like Batman seem to be elevated to a almost legendary status. Batman in particular offers a very particular form of catharsis. He's wealthy, so bills really aren't an issue. He can not only use his wealth to influence society economically, which I feel like many of us wish we could do, but he can also truly be the Dark Knight, if you will. What really separates Batman, though, is really pretty simple. In general, people seem to gravitate more towards one type of hero over another. Superman is an excellent contrast. Batman is very much anti-authority in his approach, which many young people, and some adults for that matter, can offer an escape when frustrated with the status quo. Batman also obviously has a dark side. Not only does he look dark and brooding, his actions seem somewhat close to some of the villains sometimes. It's interesting that so many people like a character who traditionally could be very much a villain, at least in initial appearance. In a way, he is the criminal's worst nightmare. I think this provides a way for viewers and readers to enjoy the idea of being a hero without adhering to the more traditional ideas of goodness, which some would say is corny. Although, obviously, many other people seem to gravitate towards that type of character, which is Superman. That's not to say that Batman is without his corny nature. Like anything, there is a comedic edge that can be taken. While Batman is fairly complex due to his obvious obsession and inner turmoil, he does dress like a bat and beat people up after all. But that itself provides some comedy. As dark as his stories can be, comics are traditionally supposed to be fun, which is one reason why Batman's moral code is so strong. Towing the line with many psychopaths and crime bosses, demons and mutant monsters, yet somehow keeping to his own personal ethics is very admirable. There's also an obvious element of tragedy the character brings, and many people can relate to the idea of losing parents at a young age, one way or another. All that being said, Batman is just a fun, cool character that anyone, within reason, could kind of be. He is only human after all, becoming the amazing hero he is through pure determination and focus, something many of us wish we could emulate in our own lives. For me, Batman just looked cool, sounded cool, and nobody could mess with him. To me and many other people throughout the world, he will always be an icon, continuing on with his never-ending crusade against evil. And that's why I think Batman is, deservedly, a pretty darn popular character. Alright everybody, that's all I have to say about Batman for today, but perhaps there will be future videos talking about the character specifically and different versions, I'm sure. Please feel free to let me know your thoughts and your experiences with the Batman character in the comments below, and I'll see you around for another video. Alright everyone, stay magical.